Welcome to Chess to Impress, and today we're going to talk about the art of checkmating your opponent's king. Putting your opponent in checkmate is all about attacking close to the king with backup. It's also about counting your opponent's escape squares and removing them. This is a visualization exercise. How many escape squares does each king have? Also, where can you put a queen near each king to checkmate it? One of those kings cannot be checkmated. Which king is the easiest to checkmate? So first of all, let's count the number of escape squares for the king on h1. The only escape square that the king has is g1. So I would love to put my queen on g2 because the knight will guard it, right? And this will result in a checkmate. Also, I can play, or I can just put my queen on f1. If I had a black queen on f1, all the escape squares are controlled and the king is in a check, which means the king cannot escape. So this king has only one escape square, so you can put your queen on g2, which will result in a checkmate. Take a look at this king. This king has three escape squares, but if you had a queen, you can put your queen on e7. If you were to put your queen on e7, the black queen on e7, the king on e8 is checkmated. Let's take a look at this king on c5. This king on c5 has a lot of escape squares. This king has one, two, three, four, five escape, six escape squares, correct? So even if you put your queen anywhere, if I put my queen on d4, or if I put my queen on d5, or if I put my queen on c3 for that matter, this is still not a checkmate. It is kind of difficult to checkmate this king because this king has a lot of escape squares. So again, this exercise is just for visualizing, just for fun. If you had a black queen, you can put it on g2 or e7 in order to get those kings on h1 and e8 respectively. As far as the king on c5 is concerned, we cannot checkmate it just yet by putting our queen anywhere because the king has a lot of escape squares. Let's take a look at position number two. Identify the escape squares for black's king, and it's white to move and checkmate black by getting rid of king's escape squares. So let's mark the escape squares. E7, D8, C8, and C6 are the escape squares for the black king. If we put our queen from F4 all the way to C7, this is a checkmate because the queen stands very close to the king, and also the queen is protected by the pawn on b6, and all the escape squares are controlled by the queen on c7. Let's take a look at position number three. Again, what we need to do is we need to identify the escape squares for the black's king. There are only two escape squares for the black's king, which are on the g file, which is g8 and g6. The h file is controlled by the rook, and the knight controls the very important f7 square, which means the knight and the rook should not be moved. They are key attackers controlling the escape squares. So what do we do to give a check and to control g6 and g8? We slide our queen to g4. All the escape squares are controlled by the queen, by the knight, by the rook, and the queen gives a check to the king on g7. Position number four, identify the escape squares for the white king. There's only one escape square, which is the e3 square. The king cannot go to e3. The king can only go to e3. The king cannot go on rank number one because of the rook on a1. The king cannot escape on g3 because of our pretty knight, which sits on h5. So how do we checkmate? We use the bishop, slide our bishop to c5, and this is game over. The king cannot go again to the first rank. The king cannot go to g3, and also the pawn cannot block this check because this pawn is pinned by the rook on a2. So if you slide your bishop from d6 to c5, this is game over for white. Position number five, identify the escape squares for the king. Apparently zero. There are no escape squares for the king. The king is trapped by his own pieces, the rook and the two pawns, and the king gasps for air. So black to play a checkmated one. Easy peasy, there's only one correct way to do so, which is to play knight g3. This is a checkmate. We need to understand that the pawn, even though it looks like it can capture the knight, it cannot capture the knight. It cannot capture the knight because you can definitely go and watch video number one, which is on pins. The rook pins the pawn, and one can never leave his king exposed. This will be an illegal move. Even the computer does not allow me to do that. So knight g3 is a checkmate because of an absolute pin on this pawn, which the rook creates by sitting on h8. Last position, position number six, identify the escape squares. There are so many escape squares for the king, and if you take a look at this position very carefully, the queen and the bishop are in a battery. They complement each other, they support each other. I would love to play this move, queen b7, if I can make it happen and checkmate the king. But I cannot do so just yet because the knight is the defender, which controls the b7 square. So what do I need to do? I need to remove the defender. How do I do it? Take a look at this rook on d1. The rook on d1 should first capture the knight on d6, and once the knight disappears, then now you can play the move queen to b7. Yes, so first identify the escape squares and make a move so that not only do you give a check, but also control those escape squares. Thank you.